interview conducted by Henry Talbert with Mrs. Agnes Mattica. Heard that you would consent to have some discussion with us because of the significance of the Institute. Obviously, we're always interested in what led you into the profession and ultimately into International Institute.
Well, I hope this doesn't sound arrogant, but I think I was born that way because from Scouts on, it was always important for me to bring people together and find solutions and create close relationships with people. And then when I actually, in Hungary, I majored in English German. So when I came to the United States as a brand new immigrant, refugee, then somehow by chance I found out that there was an opening at the International Institute in Bridgeport, Connecticut. I didn't have any kind of training, but they needed a Hungarian caseworker, and I was roaring to go. I was also very lonely, and I think that had something to do with my need to work with people and be useful. So that's how it happened. That's how it started.
And of course that led you into all the intricacies of the Institute and what was involved in that. What are some of the positions you've held in social work? You've had quite a career.
Well, I started out as a caseworker, and then eventually I became supervisor, and then I became assistant director, and then I became executive director. The last was the relatively shortest period of time. It was, I think, 3 years or 3.5 years.
And the unique nature of the Institute, which is part of a national operation, I guess projected you into quite a few relationships, which normally a person working right here in Los Angeles would not have had.
Quite possibly so, although at the time I'm sure I thought that that's how life is, and everything came very naturally. But especially at during the earliest years, the International Institute was truly international and home to many, many different ethnic groups. And as far as I know, it really was the only agency which in the 20s and 30s, of course, and 40s before I came, but even later, recognized the importance of culture in the development of human beings and the need for respecting culture. And worked with this from this premise in aiding the acculturation of people to the United States. So that I believe this was one of the reasons why we were so successful and had been so effective in assisting people while they retain their identity, to really become part of the mainstream. I think that is one of the things that was most gratifying to me. And I met everybody, I think, in social work who was working with different ethnic groups and also in immigration, because that, of course, as you know, was a very important aspect of the International Institute's work, and there again we were also pioneers.
I can remember, as being on the board at the time, you're arranging a meeting out over at USC with people from the School of Social Work, which was a rather interesting luncheon we had that day.
Can you refresh my memory? I don't remember that at all.
Remember, we were trying to develop some programs with the School of Social Work related to preparing people to work with the industries?
Oh, yes, I remember now, and I also remember that I prepared some papers and also did some workshops at SC for first and second year students in the School of Social Work that had to do with culture and especially with refugee adjustment, because we, through experience, learned some things about the dynamics of acculturation for traumatized refugees and how that worked in the community, and we were happy to share that.
Then I also remember under your leadership where we had, as we were doing our planning for the next year or even longer than that, you had enlisted the aid of some professors, I think, from SC and from UCLA to sit on our planning group.
Yes, I
These things come back to mind as I look at you.
That I didn't remember at all. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you for reminding me of these links.
Well, they become very important now as I look at this archives work and what we're trying to do, because we're trying to pull nuggets of information that have had some impact. Now, do you, from where you sat then and where you look back upon now, do you see any significant contributions the Institute made to social welfare generally in California?
I should certainly think so and hope so. Well, let's, basically I need to go back to what I was saying earlier, because I think that the greatest contribution came in helping to make people self-sufficient. And since in those prehistoric days where one didn't get government assistance and our only source of income was United Way and fees, we had mostly United Way and very little fees. We had a lot of freedom to experiment and to use our time creatively and maybe spend half an hour with one person and 8 months with another person to help them become self-sufficient. I think that really maybe the greatest contribution, aside from helping people become contributing members of society and maintaining their dignity and sense of self-worth, that International Institute helped other agencies and the community at large to begin to look at culture beyond, just festivals where people put on their nice costume and dance around, and then everybody applauds them, and then half an hour later they expect them to be totally like everybody else. So that one of the things that I think International Institute tried to do and was hopefully also successful in doing is to talk about culture as something that is not a differentiating but an enriching kind of cultural differences aspect, and to alert social workers to the importance of give recognition to these differences and to learn to work with them.
In doing that, did you encounter any obstacles? Were people vague about, certainly people from other cultures and other countries, about could they see the social work hand at moving around in their behalf, or was there a problem?
Are you talking about the community, or are you talking about the clientele?
Probably the clientele to start with, coming from so many different parts of the world.
Well, I remember, in terms of the clientele, the answer is both yes and no, because social work as a profession did not exist in the European countries or in Latin American countries. where most of the people I ever worked with came from. And I remember early in my career when I was telling my supervisor that I was going to spend X amount of time at X client's house because I had to be there for lunch or dinner or whatever, and she was explaining to me, not having graduated in this country, that social workers don't do that. You know, that there is an interview and it is formal and it is this and it is that. And I told her, well, that's fine, but if I'm going to do this, I will never be able to go to her house again, because if I refuse a meal, then the bond is broken. Now, you can call it anything you want to, but that's what's going to happen. And because she was a very bright and very responsive individual, she listened and heard it and let me do what I needed to do. But many of my clients who have made tremendous amount of progress, which I think they might not have made without the intervention of the International Institute, very often thought of us as the nice lady who speaks their language, who is a friend, who is like a sister to whom you can talk about anything and she's not going to get angry, and who will help you. And maybe 10 years later or 20 years later, they might have come back and say, hey, I'm now aware of some things that I wasn't aware of that.
Now, extending this question about impact, within the state, I know there's an institute in the Bay Area.
Yes, actually, well, there is one in Oakland and there is one in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. And they are, well, of course, California's ethnic diversity exists in the north too. So they are pretty much doing the same thing as we in terms of social work precepts, but I found that every international institute that I have known is in some way different, determined by both their staff and the ethnic groups they work with and the power structures in the community with which they have to work and so on.
Just speculating, because we're both removed from the institute and to a certain extent from formal social welfare activities, could you see a unique service that the institute or a comparable type agency could offer California now in the midst of all this discussion about immigration, cultural diversity, and the whole economic situation?
Well, I'm going to reveal my biases now, because yes, the answer is yes, but I don't know whether everything that I would consider wise is also politically correct. To me, adjustment and acculturation is a two-way street. And I do not quite agree with those who think that it is very healthy for newcomers to be given so much freedom to retain or be within their own culture that they do not have to make any adjustment to the people around them. I don't think life works that way. I don't think it ever will. And that eventually people always get there. They either make it or they don't make it. And I'm sure that, none of us can be so arrogant as to assume that if we didn't exist, the whole world would come apart. But I do believe that we can make some difference. And one of the differences that we can make is with love and affection and understanding to tell people what reality is and what is expected of them and what accountability they have, so that they do not use ethnicity as a shield when which then becomes also very often a shield of anger when things don't work well.
Or a crutch.
Or a crutch.
To excuse
or a
incompetencies.
Yeah.
This is great. Maybe this will give a boost to institute-type programs in the state.
Well, I've often been, not often, but occasionally been called a traitor to my class, because when refugees started to come, Indo-Chinese refugees, and I was on various planning commissions with other social agencies and government supported and so on, I was then saying that I did not think that giving total welfare assistance was helpful to people whose whole identity was tied to their working role in the family, as for instance the Indo-Chinese. And, one really didn't need to be a genius to see that when people did not get jobs and maybe only the woman worked and the father had no role left, the whole family disintegrated. Maybe that was the only way, with that many people to handle the problem, but I think that in our eagerness to be supportive, that sometimes we as a profession went overboard and diminished the importance of self-sufficiency and accountability.
I suppose you had various platforms through conferences and speeches to espouse some of these concepts?
Well, no, besides which I'm a coward, I'm not sure I would get up in front of my peers and say these things. But no, certainly not now. In my private life, I do a lot of volunteering, but not along these lines. Oh, but is it okay if I just go on and on? You'll stop me, won't you?
Oh,
Mr.
yes,
Talbert?
I will, or the tape will.
That one of the things where International Institute played really a very significant role was in the development of social legislation and immigration legislation pertaining to, quote, foreigners, aliens, refugees, whatever you want to call them, because we were active and consultants to many government panels and planning mechanisms and so on, and had opportunity to give a lot of input, and that input was, really well received.
And from my understanding, the Institute had, well, say in the community of social welfare agencies here, United Way, each year it was never enough, but I think they dealt as fairly with International Institute as they did with other organizations, which in a sense, I guess, was endorsement.
Is that a statement or a question?
I think it's a statement.
Okay,
it may sound questionable to you. But
well,
I was thinking of the status of the Institute.
Yeah, I think that this Institute was recognized. As you know, when it comes to money, one never feels that one gets as much as one deserves. But certainly, I think they recognized that we were important players in the field, and that the role that we played with immigrants in terms of both technical assistance and counseling was valuable. I think that's great.
Are there any significant differences you see in social work as practiced now, or social welfare as it gets to the people, in contrast to when you were at the height of your activity with the Institute? Do you see any significant trends or changes?
Yeah, I think so. I think that Well, one of the changes that I alluded to was where one got one's funding and what kind of strings are or were attached to the funding. And with United Way, there were hardly any other than accountability, and United Way agencies usually had well-trained staff. But with once one's major source of income is from government, I think the whole ballgame changes. Not only because you have to spend so much time on meeting minute, details and requirements, but also that one tends to, the focus of one's work is determined very often by where the money is. So when there is something that's in, whether it's drugs or immigration or I don't know, community organization, then that's where you are going to go with your proposals for funding. And, this is not, I'm not saying that this is dishonest or wrong, because certainly as far as I know, we have never applied for anything that we didn't believe in. But maybe the mix of where one's effort go, would not have been quite the same. The priorities would not have been quite the same had somebody just said, well, here is the money, use it to the best of your ability in the most creative way.
That seems to be very true, that often the program follows money rather than money coming as a result of the program.
And, when we had United Way funds, we were able to use it in preventive programs very often. And I don't think that one needs to elaborate why that is more effective than getting a family after it has become totally dysfunctional, regardless of how much money you have at that point or how many programs you can offer them. So lots of preventive services, at least as I saw it, happening, was something that I really regretted.
Well, as you look ahead, what would seem to be the prognosis for social welfare? Do you see us playing a more prominent role, or do you see people just taking this for granted as they've done? Those who really are skeptical about us at least take us for granted.
Well, I'm not very good about prognosticating, but I would think that leaders in social work have, and social work and social sciences and social planning has become so much the fabric of life here that practitioners and certainly the outstanding people in the field, I think, are part of government, are part of everybody's thinking. And one just hopes that their input is wise and not just politically popular. But I would think that with so many well-trained and well-meaning people, hopefully something will emerge, which it better does, because as I see the world, we are not getting any better, either in the United States or in other countries. We are not learning to live with each other better. We are not learning to deal with our conflicts better. We are not getting better education. We are in a mess. So I hope that there will be some brilliant people who can not only point to directions, but get support for some kind of thinking and programs that helps to prevent some of the great difficulties this country is facing.
Well, and it would appear that knowing how many hundreds of persons have passed through the doors of the Institute even while you were there, who knows, maybe one or two of those persons will wind up, as I think some have.
Oh, some indeed have. I know of several of our ex-clients who became social workers, who are teaching social work, who are planners in Washington and Sacramento, and doing a good job, really doing a very, very good job. And I once remember, and I think this was absolutely, well, I don't know whether it was the greatest compliment that I ever got, but it was certainly one that I remember, where one of, I was casework supervisor then, I think, or assistant director, and one of our staff went to work for the county as a social worker, and I asked her, how the interview went or what happened, something like that. And she said, oh, they hardly asked me anything. They said if I came from the International Institute, then I'm well trained. So that was a lovely thing to do.
Quite. One of the joys. Are there any things you were prepared to say that I haven't asked you during our discussion?
No, as always, you ask the questions in such a marvelous way that it's easy to talk and possibly say more than you want to hear. But no, not really. One of the things that bothers me, and maybe it's because I don't have enough confidence in the world, is that we are becoming angry at immigrants, we are becoming angry at each other, we are becoming angry at the different minorities. Everybody is looking at their rights and not enough talk about responsibilities. It worries me where it leads. That's all. But do you have any answer just to make me happy while the tape is still going?
Well, I think within some of the groups that you refer to, there is this growing consensus. I know within the African American community, there is quite a bit of dialogue that isn't accepted by everyone about this business of rights and responsibilities and color, as I said earlier, as a crutch. I think more and more, and just the very fact that some people who raise these issues get so much press now indicates that people are reading and listening to it. And I would say that in some of the great social issues of the day, some ethnic groups are begging for more publicity. Take, for example, the Los Angeles riots of a year or so ago. Certain people said, well, we were in there too. We didn't get credit for being forceful enough in pursuing our cause. Well, this has serious implications, particularly when you think of ethnic groups trying to get some relationship. They're now saying that it's no more a melting pot, it's more like a salad bowl of people where they bring what they have there without, as you said early in our discussion, without giving up everything that they hold dear, but yet releasing some of those things that lead to such pride and ultimately do not help bring about a compatible mix in this nation. I know that when you left a great deal of paperwork at the Institute. You probably took some things home. Any of your writings or anything that you're most welcome and encouraged to, if you have some things that you'd like to put in the archives group, we'd be most honored to accept them.
Thank you very much, and you mentioned that to me on the phone, and I was remiss because I'm leaving for Europe in a short time, and I had so much to do that I didn't look for that in the various boxes where I have stuff. But if it's still opportune in let's say a month or two, then after I've returned, I'd be so happy to look for and see what I might provide.
This will be wonderful because this is an ongoing process. It's really just getting underway. So whenever you return, and if you sneak in something about European social work, we'll include that too.
Very good.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
You've been most gracious, and we appreciate this will be a worthwhile addition to the archives.
Thank you.
Interesting tidbits that came out of the wrap-up of this. Now, you were saying something about the venture you wanted to involve yourself with the university.
Yes, I was thinking and hoping that SC, I understood, was recording the history of social work in this community. And the International Institute had case records going back to the 20s, which were absolutely fascinating and really reflected what was going on in this community, from the Moroccan Russians, for instance, whom the Institute helped to deal with the school system because they wouldn't put their kids in school, their religion forbade it, and the Japanese deportations and everything else afterwards, and the different kind of refugee waves. So I thought that would be lovely if it could go on microfiche, but I wasn't able to sell the idea, or it was too big a job, or whatever happened. But I don't know whether the Institute still has those files. We were dying for space, and I felt that somehow this needed to be saved. I don't know whether that was possible.
Well, when we talk with them about their material, we'll certainly ask about that.
Good. A couple of things come to mind that I failed to mention earlier in relation to community networking and mutual planning by social agencies. One was a group of the voluntary agencies, those that worked with immigrants, Catholic Welfare, Jewish Family Service, the Lutherans, International Rescue Committee, and so on. And we used to meet at a private home every 2 months or so, and had the director of the Immigration and Naturalization Service there and some of his staff. So in a very social kind of a setting, we were talking about policy and important issues, and it was not the kind of adversarial relationship or atmosphere which one normally has when one goes into immigration court to represent immigrants who have some problem with the service. And so that I think that the voluntary agencies, International Institute being one of them, and I think we pioneered this effort, became known or viewed as a supportive group for the immigration service, and have accomplished, I think, very much that helped us, gave us access to them, and thereby we were able to help our clients, where we could just call up somebody and ask for some information, and because we were International Institute or Catholic Welfare or so on, we would immediately get it.
Well, weren't you also very much involved in the amnesty program when it came out?
Yes, we were involved with that. Well, one of the things that we were involved in, which was also a first for the International Institute, is that we had staff accredited to represent people in immigration court, just the same as attorneys. And I think that the International Institute was the first in the country where this was true. And even before the amnesty, there were various kinds of programs where people needed to be registered in a certain period of time in order to be grandfathered into some kind of program. And what we started to do at the Institute, and I know other of the voluntary agencies then also adopted this, we had group meetings. We simply didn't have the time and the staff to handle thousands of people separately when, we had 2 weeks or 4 weeks to accomplish something. And we used to have overhead projectors and put the paper in front of people and then write the answer on the overhead projector. They could copy it for themselves and then ask questions when individual stuff was needed. And, the one thing that I believe is important to mention, where you were saying that did immigrants have an understanding of the impact of social work? And I said to you, no, they just saw us as helpful, kind of nice ladies or gentlemen. That immigration services were one of the things that brought people to the agency. And then through the process of helping them with immigration, all the other areas of their lives opened up. And we would never have had access or entree to the different kind of family problems and acculturation difficulties and whatever that we were dealing with because they began to trust us through the immigration process. Now, the other thing that I forgot was that one of the projects that we initiated came about when we had to hire so many people with no background in social work to, for instance, help the Indo-Chinese refugee population. So we had to have Vietnamese and Cambodians and Lao and the Chinese-speaking Southeast Asians to work with this population. And we developed a cooperative project with Family Service. And what we provided was a cultural sensitization to their staff, such as the mother-in-law is going to be arriving soon, and there is a family of 6 living in 2 rooms, and then family service staff would say, well, gee, this is going to be very stressful, how are you going to handle it? And then the Vietnamese person would say, oh, no, we are delighted. She is our mother. She is our mother-in-law. This is going to be an honor. So there were awful lot of things that went into the sharing, and they gave us consultation and helpful expertise in social work skills. So that we thought was really a very mutually productive kind of cooperation between 2 agencies.
In fact, wasn't there a family service executive on your board at one time, I believe?
For a short time, Tony, no, what was his last name? And then other obligations forced him to leave. But and this, of course, also came about because in United Way, the agency executives learned to know each other, and when I became a director, he became my mentor and big brother, and that was a program that United Way had for new executive directors, to have a more experienced executive director help them with the ropes.